53 and talking to you today about one of the most classic, media, let's call it a stunt when it comes to headlines. So when you first see this headline, so this one says, "Force the nation into recession, Aussies urged." That actually wasn't the headline prior to clicking on this article. So just checking my notes here, but the actual headline of this article was "Recession, Aussies told to do the unthinkable." So as you can imagine, it was like recession, that's fairly emotive, and then do the unthinkable. What the hell could be the unthinkable? So we come in here and the actual article headline is "Force the Nation into Recession, Aussies urged." And you look at that and you go, what the heck are they talking about? Force the economy into a recession. How could that be a good thing? So let's scroll past as much of this garbage on this website as we can. But basically, there is a guy, an associate professor of quantitative finance at Bond University. Sounds pretty important and highfalutin. But basically what he's saying is we need to cut back on our Netflix, our flat whites, our movies and eating out so that we can trigger a recession now to avoid a deeper, longer recession in the future. And so his arguments are that if we can cut back on our discretionary spending, we will collectively drive the nation into a recession. And he claims it'll be far more short-lived, like up to about 12 months, than if we let the economy continue the way it's going, which will result in more and more claims for higher wages, which will create this spiral that will result in a much deeper and longer recession. So from that respect, it actually sounds quite reasonable. And he's basically saying that we're now getting all these warnings of more rate hikes to try and rein the economy in. And there's obviously all the conflict around the world, particularly in the Ukraine and the Middle East, which is heightening tensions everywhere, which always has a flow-on effect to economies if we go into war. So his argument is pretty strong. And suggesting that to avoid that severe recession that will be brought on if we continue to go the way we are, where more and more industries, and so he talks a bit further down here, I think, about the different unions that are negotiating or inclining. Here we are. They're asking for more wage increases across, construction, healthcare, education, and others. So what that's basically saying is if those wage increases keep being required because of rising interest rates and the cost of living and all of the rest that's going on, which isn't at the moment being reined in by the rising interest rates, surprisingly, people are still spending. So the argument is that if we keep getting more interest rate rises because we're still spending, which leads to more wage increase demands, and that's not a result of that wage increase is not a raise in productivity, then the economy is going to start to shrink. It's going to start to make Australia less competitive compared to the rest of the world, and that will send us into, to use a media term, a death spiral and a much deeper recession than what he is predicting if we can just all pull back on our own discretionary spending, because it appears that everything else is not slowing us down. So if we can just slow down on our discretionary spending, it'll force the economy into a recession. Now, I'm not 100% convinced that that necessarily is what would happen, or that one news story could generate the response from the Australian population that would therefore result in everyone spending less on these discretionary items and therefore force the economy into a recession. But it's an interesting take, and obviously all of us would like to avoid a deep and severe prolonged recession. That's never good for those people who can least afford that type of scenario. The unfortunate thing about these types of recessions is the people who can manage their way through them are the ones that make all these bold claims, and the ones that are going to struggle the hardest are not necessarily the ones out there spending on Netflix, their lattes and so forth. So really important to be mindful of that. But there are some merits in this. Cut back on your dining and Netflix. I think if we're trying to align this story with your personal circumstances, have a look at your discretionary spending. It's always a good thing to do on a regular basis, and just see if there is some money flowing out of your money plan without it necessarily getting you any great deal of benefit, and just have a look at them. So we've got to spend our money on shelter, our homes, and utilities and food. But if we can cut back on some other areas, that's a great thing in terms of the long-term scenario. So I'm not thinking here about avoiding a recession, but if we can cut back on some of those things without obviously cutting back on life, but where we are able to cut back on discretionary spending and put that into investing, we can take care of our future self, so that when events like these type of things might happen, and let's face it, it's been a long time since we've had any form of prolonged recession, we're a little bit more protected. So I guess the warning of this article is pretty valid. Look at your discretionary spending, make sure it's not out of control, so that you're in a stronger position to be investing your money. But does that mean that the population is going to listen to this cry or this request for people to cut back on discretionary spending so that it sends us into a recession? I very much doubt it. But as you can tell, it got me to click in and do a weekly wisdom about it. And, it's something that we obviously need to be mindful of, is whether or not a recession is coming. I think it's very hard to tell, and it will depend very much on what happens in the US later this year, what happens in the war scenarios, which hopefully does not happen. And it also depends on what happens with interest rates in Australia in particular, because our inflation's been stubborn. And when I say it's been stubborn, it's not necessarily been stubborn because of our actions as consumers, but it's been stubborn because of the self-fulfilling nature of inflation. So they've used interest rates to slow down inflation and slow down our spending, but that's been forced to create flow-on impacts to prices of goods, and therefore the goods that we're consuming, that we have to consume, have gone up. Just have a look at what's happening in the housing market and the rental market in particular. With interest rates going up, landlords' costs have gone up. They've had to pass them on to their tenants, and so we've now got a rental crisis. And that all flows through into the inflation numbers. And so a little bit self-fulfilling there, even though it's supposed to slow us down. And so the latest news out this week, obviously, is that the inflation number was still too high. And so there's some people now predicting that that the next move for interest rates is actually up rather than down. We'll be interested to see what that does. And then we throw in a topic that we've talked about a number of times on these weekly wisdoms, the fact that immigration is still really on a bit of a tear. Another over 100,000 in the month of March alone came into the country. They've all got to find somewhere to live. And the government's doing this for a very simple reason, and that is to drive the economy during a period of time where they haven't been able to stimulate it in other ways. So the best way to stimulate it is bring more people into the country. They're going to consume more goods, and that therefore keeps the economy rolling. So the flip side, obviously, of more people coming in is they've got to find housing, and they're coming into a market where housing is extremely tight, and that's putting all types of other political pressures on them. So, as always, the economy is a very difficult beast. And when it comes to how we react to these types of articles and our own personal scenario, sure, a great idea to have a look at your discretionary spending and see how that's tracking. But let's not get too carried away with potential recessions. And if you can cut back on recession, cut back on your discretionary spending and put some more of that into investing, then that's a great idea and a great way to protect yourself from any recessionary type impact on the economy. So that is this week's Weekly Wisdom, episode number 53. I encourage, if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you hit the subscribe button and the little bell to get notified. They'll be both up there somewhere. And if you're watching on Facebook or LinkedIn, do me a favor, hit the like, the comment, and the share buttons, and let's get more people learning and sharing about financial literacy, and let's spread the word as far and as wide as we possibly can. Have a great week. Let us know what you thought of this one. Let me know what you're thinking when it comes to whether or not you want a recession or not. I get the idea that it probably is a not, but give me your thoughts. Let me know what you're thinking, and I'll see you again next week for another Woody's Weekly Wisdom. Cheers.